Hey guys, how's it going? Michael Troy here. I am so excited today for today's comic book chat. I'm here with Mike Ortiz, the creator of The Last Abraxan, which has been funded on Kickstarter and has a few days left as the time of the recording of this video. I think there's about a week left. And if you're a fan of my channel and know the kind of books I love, you know that I know that you're going to love this book. It's a complete throwback to the 70s. It is amazing. I cannot wait to talk to Mike about it. So thanks so much for being here, Mike. How you doing today?
Thank you. I'm doing very good. Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome. Okay, so uh, give us the like little elevator pitch of what your comic book is here.
The elevator pitch for this book is basically if you think of Alan Moore's 1963, this is my 1979. This is my attempt to create as closely as I can with, a little bit of modernity, a comic book from 1979, and that's pretty much when I started collecting. I've been reading comics all my life. 1979, basically the time period that has the still only 35-cent burst in the corner, which is sort of famous to any comic book fans over a certain age. That's really when I started. And so that's what I wanted to recreate. I wanted to do a comic that felt like it could have been on the spinner rack back in 1979, along with all of those comic books that I started reading. And I thought that there had been a lot of comics that were like that, and again, starting with 1963. There's tons of these sort of books on Kickstarter. I'm not pretending that I'm doing anything new. I'm just sort of doing my version of it. But really, a lot of it also kind of had to do with the like the facsimile editions that you talk about quite a bit on your show. Like it became that idea when I was looking at those, and I was thinking about, wouldn't it be cool if they did a fake comic set in the past that would have those old ads? So something like, I think a great example would be the John Byrne Elsewhen. Like as much as I'm looking forward to these nice, beautiful hardcovers, I'd love to see those printed as individual issues with the ads that actually would have been around at that time, and so I can pretend that that's a real comic book. So that's really what I wanted to do, is make a comic book that was fake but would feel like it was the real deal.
It's funny you mentioned 1963 because that's the obvious comparison, and
Mhm.
I didn't think of it once when I was looking through your material. So that's
Oh wow.
kind of funny. But yeah, like you said, I mean, you're not reinventing the wheel. A lot of people have done these sort of throwback books, but I have to say, like looking through all your material and looking at the actual book, I don't know that anyone's done it in such depth, detail, and authenticity as you.
Oh,
Like it's super crazy almost. Like the amount of I mean, it's obvious you've done your research and you've done your work. Like from cover to cover, this is jam packed, like full of goodies, and it does look like a throwback to the 70s. Of course, it's funny because it's like I after interviewing a bunch of artists and people and just doing my show for a while, I've come to the conclusion, and it makes perfect sense that we kind of are beholden to the comic books that we grew up
mhm.
on. I'm more like of an 80s kind of guy, so that's like pretty much my wheelhouse, my go-to, my favorite. Somebody like Eric Larson loves Marvel 70s and
Mhm.
it's dripping all over his work. So I think that's cool. I think another comparison, because the other sort of concept of this book is like it's I mean it's issue number one, but it's supposedly from a comic book from the past, right?
Right,
So
right.
sort of like what was that Robert Kirkland comic book where he did like one
Yes,
issue,
Solid Blood.
Solid Blood? So it kind
Yeah.
of reminded me of that in a way, you know what I mean? Because uh you're sort of but in that in turn reminded me of like being a comic book fan in real time in like the late 70s, early 80s. When
Mhm.
when you do pick up a comic book and you're immersed in this world suddenly and it's like I talk about how people say that comic books are too unuser friendly, like that, it's
Mhm.
such a turn off, and that's why they always start with these new number ones and stuff. And
Right.
my first issue of Uncanny X-Men was like 163 or something like that. And it didn't stop me from wanting
Right.
to go forward and backward in the collection. So I think that's I'm sorry,
And
I'm rambling.
oh no, I mean, and that's exactly kind of one of the things I wanted to do. There was a point where I was going to do this at, as issue 3 or issue 5, because you're right, that's how you discovered a comic. And then it was context cues, and every issue Wolverine would remind you what his powers are. Like they would do those sorts of things within the issue. So there was a point when I was first developing this where I did think about starting it at issue 4 or something like that. But when I first came up with this idea, the intent was to distribute, the primary goal was the direct market, and it was going to be distributed through Diamond, because when I first came up with this idea, it was many years ago. It was one of those ideas that percolated for a while, and then, like everybody else during COVID, it kind of got resurrected, and then I've been working on it bits and pieces over the years since. Um, but like the main reason I didn't was just that idea of, yeah, well, once I actually get into the direct market, if it's an issue 3, unless I can handhold retailers and audiences to know that no, you can still pick it up here, that it would get ignored. So I did go with an issue 1, but I went with a different kind of conceit, because this is supposed to be an alternate world, like the way, if you look at 1963, Alan Moore has a whole fake 1960s image company in the letters pages and in the editorial and things like that. So I wanted to do a similar thing, and kind of when you read the editorial pages, you'll have fake creators, you'll have fake characters from other books and things like that. Um, so the even though this is the first issue, it's pretending that this character appeared elsewhere. So it's pretending that it appeared in basically the equivalent of Marvel Premiere, and then is spun off into its own book. So there's editorial notes referencing issues of this Margood premiere that never existed, but maybe someday I'll make it. Who knows? And I have other ideas of how I could incorporate that. But that was really one of the ideas: is you're supposed to be thrown in, and then you realize just in this book that there's a whole universe of characters and creators and other fans, that you can get all of that just from one book. And that's kind of what I was trying to capture here. And I think I got there. And like you said, I did a lot of research for this book. Certainly the research is being a comic book fan for, 50 years now. But I did dig out a lot of comics from the era. I made a chart of what ads appeared in each kind of book, where they appeared. I learned a lot of stuff. Like I didn't realize that the Hostess ads tended to be in the same spot every month. I mean, I'd seen that forever. I never thought about that. I never thought about ads typically running in the same pages. The same thing with Heroes World and stuff like that. And you can even see how letters pages changed the spot. It was really kind of a fascinating learning experience for me doing the research, because we look at these ads for how long, but we never think about like the details about it. Like, somebody bought this ad and placed this ad and designed this ad, and all of that was done by something that's other than the editorial structures we're familiar with. It's almost a whole different part of the company that handles all of that we know nothing about, but we still see the results for. So yeah, this I wanted it to be this, the comic itself, the story itself, and maybe I shouldn't say this, is almost secondary to the experience of this newsprint thing that has ads, that references a larger universe. Like it's really that experience that I was trying to do.
It's funny you should say
That
that
sounds
because
so pretentious. I'm so sorry.
no, I don't think I actually feel like that's kind of the perfect description because I thought that because to be honest with you, like I have slight ADD and like it's super dense, you know what I mean? There's like a
Mhm.
lot to take in, so I'm kind of all over the place with it. But I have to say, total bang for your buck, you know what I mean? There's a
Mhm.
lot to get into, there's a lot to explore. Um, and it is like I feel like you say the story's secondary in a way, but I wouldn't say that so much. But I have to say, like the other aspect of it does seem just as exciting or as much of an integral part of the book as the story itself. Um, so since we are talking about the ads, I because they look super authentic, so I thought some of them might just be real. And but then of course I was reading the notes of like the ad for Learn to Play the Guitar and
Mhm.
realized that you made it up and it was quite
Yeah.
funny. And I like that. If I were doing something like that, it would be so hard for me to resist to like make the ads like so over the top. But the Sea
Right.
Monkeys one seemed a little more authentic. Like, so
Well,
how did you
yeah.
approach like
Um,
tackling the ads?
So for example, like the music ad is not duplicating any specific ad. It's just a generic. They used to run a lot of learn to play guitar ads. There's also a Muscle Master ad that is just a generic ad. So the ads where I was doing something that was not specifically referencing an ad, I tended to try and do those a little bit more straight. So for Sea Monkeys, what I wanted to do was replicate it exactly. I tried to match the fonts, the words, basically everything in there is as close to a real Sea Monkeys ad, except I substituted the word aqua for sea. So they're aqua monkeys. And
Hmm.
that was just because sea monkeys still exist and they're a trademarked item. There was a point where I was considering reaching out to the people at Sea Monkeys and saying, look, if you let me use, your trademark and I will duplicate an old ad, it'll be free advertising, but I just decided not to do that. And the same thing with Grit. There's an ad for Grit, and I
Hmm.
just changed that to Grut. And I think there's a couple of small jokes, but for those, I wanted them to be as exact as possible. Same thing with the Count Dante, which flips a little bit. I switch it from Count Dante to Count Virgil because I want to put myself in there. So some of the ads I really attempted to do exact or as close to exact without infringing copyrights, and then other ones were just kind of a little bit more fun, and it really depended on um, for me, kind of how iconic the ad was, and just if I came up with something fun or funny for it. So the guitar, it was just, I just love sad rock and roll stories, and that's really what it was. It was a chance to kind of make a joke on the fact that everybody who dreams of playing guitar, they're actually best case scenarios are usually still pretty bad for a lot of musicians, and just like jokes like that and a lot of the become an artist ads are all basically saying yes, become an artist and you will live destitute for the rest of your life, sort of thing. So I wanted to have jokes in some places. Other places I just wanted to see how close I could get to the real thing, and in some cases that really depended on how I was feeling the day I was working on it.
Did you do everything yourself? Like I feel like it's a one-man show. Did you?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
which is crazy because okay, so I'm looking at the letters, or the credits, here. Mike Ortiz, story and pencils, and I do you mind if I call out one of your
Oh, sure,
Easter eggs here?
sure.
So Mick Hain is ink.
Yeah,
That's an obvious reference to Bjorn Hain
Bjorn Hain. I figured
when
that's Bjorn's brother.
John Byrne took over the Fantastic Four.
Yeah.
He Terry Austin was supposed to ink it, and Byrne wound up inking the first issue, so he credited himself as his a sort of anagram or amel whatever of his name, Bjorn Hain.
Bjorn Hain, yeah.
So I thought that was funny. Tim Roski at letters. That seems like a tip of the hat to Tom Orzechowski.
Actually, that's my name anagrammed. That's Mike
Oh,
Ortiz.
okay. Okay, but it works out kind of nice that
Oh
it
yeah,
sounds a little bit like Tom Orzechowski.
yep. And
Tony,
actually, I was going to say the font that I used for this was, I mean, I specifically searched online to see like what is the font that's closest to Tom Orzechowski's lettering because he's the letterer of Starlin's Warlock, or at least a lot of it, and one of my favorite letterers, and it's certainly to me one of the signature letterers of this era. So yeah, I mean, a Orzechowski reference is definitely in this book.
yeah, he's one of my favorite letters. I loved John Workman is one of my favorite
Mhm.
letters. Tony Vazzelli, I couldn't figure that one out. So,
Uh, that is a weird one, and that is an inside joke. Tony is my middle name,
okay,
and Vizelli is uh, the non-anglicized version of my mother's maiden name.
okay,
So it's basically my middle name and my mother's maiden name because again, it's me.
right. You got to put, nods to yourself. And
Yep,
Al Pilgrim feels like a direct reference to the great editor Al Milgrom, of
yep,
course.
yep.
Jim Gunner, editor in chief. So that's a mix of Jim Shooter and
Well, just Jim Shooter. I figured
okay.
Shooter and
Oh,
Gunner.
Gunner, that makes sense.
So
I,
yeah,
I know Shooter's my man. It's like I know that rest his soul. It's like his name was on every single Marvel comic that I worshipped. So he was sort of
mhm.
like this big, like ominous, like
Oh yeah.
leader or something. So I love that. This is just like the look of the book is amazing. Your art style. I'm trying to figure out, like, I see a lot of different influences here that I pick up. Like, I see an early Byrne, I see some Jim Starlin, I see a little bit of Ron Lim, actually. I feel like some of the inking is reminiscent of Joe Rubinstein's inks.
Uh, I wish, but yeah.
So, and of course, the coloring is done in like the bando dots of the to
Mm,
make it look era appropriate. And like the look of the book is just so authentic. Like,
thank you.
I'm trying to figure out like if the cover is the only thing that kind of gives it away. There's a slight modernity to the way the logo and the cover is colored,
Yeah.
but I like that. It's a great cover. Um, you
Well,
also go
there are a couple of things like in the cover. So certainly, one of the things about it, I actually pull out because I can't remember what it looks like. So like this idea of like the main figure and the floating heads, was actually kind of a reference to Starlin's first issue of Warlock, which has him floating and then the Magus's head behind him. But that is where I got the idea of this sort of color hold, because they actually used a lot of color holds on the covers for Starlin's Warlocks, which again was not something I even knew what a color hold was when I was a kid. But as I was looking at this stuff again, I was kind of going, wow, I didn't really realize that they were doing a lot of that stuff even as early as 75 and 76. So yeah, some of that stuff came out of the exploration, and the cover was actually the first thing that was done on this book. So that was, I had not even entirely figured out what I wanted to do yet stylistically. The first 4 pages of the book were done quite a bit before the rest because I was just experimenting, and I was trying different color methods, different color techniques, and things like that. So there was actually kind of an interesting gap. But yeah, the beginning of the book, yeah, I can see it, and you saw it in the cover. The beginning of the book, there's a little bit of a difference as you get into the book because there's actually probably a gap of over a year between the drawing of page 4 and page 5, and there's a lot of the earlier pages are much more detailed because when you're gung ho, you're like drawing like crazy, and then when you're 20 pages in, you're just like, I got to get this done, and you take more shortcuts.
I mean, like you just, well, shortcuts. What shortcuts? There's so much attention to detail here, including like the little cayenne tabs at the top of the
Yeah.
page, to the indicators to the printer that would have been there on a book from 1970, whatever. Um, it's just, it's like, it's very impressive, like the amount of work. How long did it take you to do this?
Um, in terms of, I mean, like I actually started it in 2018,
Hmm.
and worked on it. I was freelancing and I worked on it for a few months. And again, I got like the first 4 pages, and then employment changes, and all of a sudden I have a job that does not give you any sort of free time, and it just sits until COVID, and then worked on for a couple weeks during COVID. But I had a job where I was an essential employee, so I was back to work. That got things going, and then basically I've changed jobs a couple of times since then. And when I have a job where there's a little bit more free time, where there's a little bit more work-life balance, I can work on it. And then other times, it just sits for months on end. I also in the middle of the book developed cataracts and had eye surgery, and that just sort of sucked 6 months out of the process. But this was probably um, months and months, or at least 6, 8 months of kind of pretty solid work. But then I actually finished the book late last year, and then just like had to take a break from it. And then I spent and really the first part of this year kind of getting the Kickstarter ready. Like that's one thing that I knew how to make a comic book. I had never done it professionally. Um, but it's something that I've been studying my whole life, and I'm a professional graphic designer and illustrator, so I knew all of the stuff that it takes to make a book and get it printed and Photoshop and all of that. But I had no idea how to do a Kickstarter, and I had no idea how to do a website or shoot videos and all of this stuff. So I just basically had to teach myself in the first few months of 2025 how to do all of this stuff so that I could launch the Kickstarter. And like honestly, that is more work and less satisfying work than making the comic. Like making stuff I love doing. Selling stuff is hard. Like
It,
that's really the pain in the ass. And that's like not like that now I completely understand like this is why creatives get screwed over because at some point we just kind of say, I'll let someone else take care of the stuff that deals with money. I just want to make stuff. And if, you hand that over to someone who does not have your best interest in heart, that's where it happens. But I get it. Um, I know some people who thrive on selling and thrive on marketing their stuff and getting their face out there and I don't. I actually my endorphin rush is sitting there making the book. And when like even now, um, I'm my gut is spinning because I'm nervous. I'm talking about the book, I'm talking about my work. I'm never comfortable with that. I just want to go, here, look at it. Don't look at me, look at it. Um, so I get it. It's really, really tough to do the Kickstarter and sell the stuff and promote this stuff. And I have so much more respect for all the people who can do it. Like one of the reasons I did the book is because I knew, even though I'd never done it, I knew how hard it is to make a comic just because I am an artist and I've done so many projects like that. And I think too many fans don't understand or realize just how much work goes into even the absolute worst comic you've ever seen. And it's I think if you do understand that, you back off on some of the intensity of your criticism a little bit. I hate it when somebody describes any kind of work of art as being lazy because making something is inherently not lazy. Talking about it, sitting on your ass, complaining on the internet, that's lazy. But anyone who's like, no, I'm going to make something, I'm going to spend my time to bring something into the world and show it to other people, like that's not lazy. That's hard work. And it may connect to people, it may not, but like and so that's when I started this project, that's kind of what I wanted to do. Originally, this was going to be a process blog, showing all the steps of the way, but that's even more work. But seriously, this is the hardest thing I have ever done in my life, and I've worked on some pretty large projects. But comics are not easy, as you know, as all the people you've had on your show talking about it know. And it's like until you do it, you do not really know. I thought I knew because again, I'd been a professional artist, but comics is harder than any other kind of art I've ever done.
it's not for the weak of heart.
No.
Trust. It's you have to be resilient. You have to be a lot of things for sure. And but the hard work definitely shows in your book. And this congratulations. This is your first Kickstarter campaign.
Yeah.
You've succeeded. Like I said, we still have a way to go. And I this book is so amazing. I feel like that is one of the downsides of Kickstarter is like I feel like it does kind of limit your audience. So that's why I do like to have people like you on and give people the chance because sometimes the book's available after the campaign,
Sure.
but often it's not. So if you miss it, you miss it, and sometimes that's unfortunate. After doing a couple of Kickstarter campaigns, I'm definitely looking to get a publisher behind me on my next
Sure.
project. Um, but it's still a very valid way to do a book. So you've told us about like the book as far as it's beyond being a concept book. What's the story like? A little. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the story and
Uh,
the main character?
sure. Sure. The story, well, basically, it was my uh homage to Jim Starlin's Warlock. Like that was really that was one of those kind of change your life books for me. I was a kid, 9 years old, and I'm reading all of this amazing cosmic stuff right after seeing Star Wars, which would kind of be the other big influence on this book. So that's kind of my elevator pitch is it's Obi-Wan Kenobi meets Adam Warlock. It's the the Order of Abraxas is basically kind of like the Jedi, although it's more like I consider them like Shaolin monks in space. So they're physically, honed to perfection. They have mystical abilities, but not like there's no lightsabers, there's no levitation or things like that. A little bit more grounded in their abilities. And honestly, I don't even know what all their abilities are. One of the ideas with this book when I went into it was to try to be authentic in terms of how I do it. So I have a broad idea of other things and broad idea about the characters, backstory and even his powers. But a lot of times they were making it up as they went back then. So I made it up as I went as I was writing it. And so there's a lot of things about the character I don't even know that basically if I were to have a second issue, I would worry about it then. So I was trying to think about it in that sort of way. Um, but that's the basic idea is he's from this order of space monks that were destroyed under mysterious circumstances. He doesn't know how, he doesn't know why, and now he's left alone to wander the universe. So it's basically Obi-Wan Kenobi if there was no Luke Skywalker and the Jedi were completely destroyed. Now he just wanders around looking, saying that he just wants to be left alone, but constantly stumbling into people in need. So it's like the Incredible Hulk TV show or the Kung Fu TV show. And that's the basic idea. And so if I were to do more issues of this, they would, this is a done in one issue. That was one of the other ideas is everything you need is in this book. I would want the book to continue in that way. It would be one issue stories, two issue stories, because that's exactly how we read things back then. And I have, again, broader ideas if I were to do more issues. I don't know if I will. Again, this is a lot of work over a lot of time. Um, but I'm trying to figure out like how can I work faster if it's possible? Would it be possible? Like with this issue, I wanted to do everything myself because that's kind of the bucket list thing to see if I can. Um, After this, I would be willing to pass off doing other things to other people if there were, money to pay them appropriately. But again, I'm not even thinking that right now. I'm thinking of this of just this book. And one of the nice things is so I am printing on newsprint and I'm printing offset printing on newsprint, not digital. I wanted this to look like ink on paper, and the way you get ink on paper on newsprint, particularly, is ink on paper. So that means high minimums. Like I can't just print 50 copies or 100 copies. So I have to the minimum, that you can print for something like this is like 1,000 copies, but 2,000 copies, 3,000 copies wind up being only a little bit more. So I'm printing up thousands of this just because kind of I need to. And that way also I can make it available after the Kickstarter. So when the Kickstarter ends, I've got a website where I'll sell it there. Um, I also am making two versions of it. One that's going to be the Kickstarter. Because I'm printing thousands, I can do multiple covers. The interiors will be the same. There's multiple variant covers for the Kickstarter, but then I can also print a cover that is for the direct market with like a regular price on it. So the plan also is to sell a different version of this comic in the direct market. Originally, it was going to be Diamond. Who knows if that's going to happen now? I'm going to try to submit to massive indies and see if I can get distributed through Lunar. So, hopefully this will go out in comic shops as well, at least in some form. And the Kickstarter really is there to fund that and to generate interest in that and to really just create something that I can then take to retailers. Like that's another thing is I want to do shows and sell it at shows. I can take it. I'll have copies to give to retailers, for examples, give out to other publishers and things like that. So that is the advantage and disadvantage of printing offset on newsprint is um, I get that authenticity, but the downside is I'm going to have a boatload of comics sitting in my basement for a long time until I can sell them or give them away. And that's not, I'm probably going to be, I've just joked to people that I'm going to be giving people copies of this book for the rest of my life because I'm going to have probably just a few thousand copies when it's all said and done.
Well, I will happily review mine when she sends it to me, so don't
Oh, great.
worry about that. My one little advice to you is for the version that you want to distribute to Diamond, make sure you put a UPC symbol on it if you
Oh,
haven't
yeah.
thought of that. Okay,
Yeah.
because I didn't do that for my Big Bang book. I didn't know it was going to be distributed, and they wound up having to put like sticker labels on them, which is like, oh,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, actually, I did get, and this is kind of, one of those things where you jump in without thinking about it too much. I actually did get a UPC for the book. Um,
Which
but
fits your brand anyway, right? I guess
oh
that's
yeah,
why it would have to have a UPC symbol, right? Yeah.
right, right. Like that was the thing is I wanted to have a UPC. Like even it had a fake UPC that was like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for the longest time. And then I did get a UPC for it, but then I found out afterwards that, and again, part of it, since we're not Diamond's not around, so I don't know what the rules are. Diamond actually has a very specific thing with their UPCs, how they're done, and also if you have variant covers. And I didn't follow any of that, so I'm probably gonna have to buy a new one anyway. But
Okay.
that's I've got time for that and to research that a little bit more. But yeah, and it's funny. Originally, I was going to do the same version for Kickstarter and um, for direct market, but actually wound up talking to the guy who runs comics for Kickstarters. I can't remember his name, Sean, I think. Very, very accessible. Kickstarter's been wonderful about, answering questions and doing all this stuff. They really do a good job of providing resources, I think, and answers to people. And he kind of pointed me in the direction of making the Kickstarter one because it wasn't really going to be any more expensive with the variant covers. Making the Kickstarter ones, and the direct sales ones, the direct sales ones, which honestly does reflect the time better. There one of the variants that I have for this is basically a Whitman variant because that was the only kind of variant you had for comics back in 1979. So that was my attempt to be a little bit authentic, even in the rewards in a couple of places.
Before I forget, where did the name come from, the last Abraxan?
Um, that I
Because
brainstorming.
it sounds so perfect. It sounds like definitely could have come out of that era.
Um, it's funny because I was just kicking around ideas, and I actually have uh, a sheet of paper I was just writing. I was just kicking around ideas. For some reason, it really did come. So I'm a graphic designer, so a lot of times I will think in terms of the visuals and think of terms of the logo. So all I knew was I wanted a logo that had a big letter at the beginning, a big letter at the end, and smaller text in the middle. So I had, and the shape. So the shape of the logo, I can actually hold it up here. I had this shape in my head without even knowing what the word was. And then I got weirdly focused on, I want an X in the middle just because I thought that visual would be nice. So it was going to be like Raxor, Roxon, something like that. And with a big letter, small X in the middle. And I just started varying out names, and I just kind of stumbled on in my head to the name Abraxas because that's a real name. It's a god, I believe, and mostly I'm thinking of it from the Carlos Santana album. And really, one of my favorites is the Rick Veitch Abraxas and the Earthmen strip that ran in Epic Illustrated that was collected later. So Abraxas was just a name that popped into my head, and I was like, the name Abraxas is too on the nose. What if it's Abraxan and he's the follower of Abraxas? So then it was just going to be the Abraxan. And then it just sort of like, that's not long enough, and just last Abraxan. So it really was one of those kind of like just improvising it and rolling with it, and kind of then I sketched out the logo, and I'm like, all right, that's it. That's just sort of nailed it. And at that point, I don't know who the Order of Abraxas is. I don't have any of that information. I just know I look at my notes, and one of the things that's involved with the Kickstarter is I give a PDF of basically the whole history of the book, of all of the making of. I've got scans of the notes, and you just see like the notes say things like John Byrne meets Jim Starlin, sideburns, 70s, and just all the different sort of things that I wanted. There's a sketch where the guy's got a headband. There's one where he's got like I don't know what you named like a Jason Wingard facial hair. Like I wanted it to kind of have some sort
Like
of 70s
the mutton chops or whatever.
yeah. And
Yeah.
so yeah, it was really just this process of jotting things down and making it up as I go. Like that was really the big thing. One of the other things about this is in as weird a way as possible, I did this Marvel style, even though I'm the writer and the artist. I did not write out a script. I just wrote out basically bullet points of plot. This happens, this happens, this happens, this happens. Then I drew the story, and then I went back and wrote the dialogue. And as I was drawing it, I was like, all right, I'm going to leave a lot of room in this panel. This is where I can do some exposition. So the idea was to really, even in the process of making it, make it somewhat authentic. I even lettered it before I inked it, because in the old days, that's how they did it. Um, I actually, the book is almost entirely digital. That's the weird irony, is even though it's this attempt to create as analog a comic as you can have, the pencils were done entirely on the iPad. Um, most of the inks were on the iPad. There, all of the ad pages and then a couple of the other pages in the middle are hybrid. So I would do half digital inks, print it out, and then ink the rest by hand. Um, that's really slow. That really took so much time that for the last half of the book, I switched entirely to digital, which to me just became very strange because this is supposed to be this analog comic, but I still wanted to try to make it as close to that as possible, even down to like, even though it was digital, I actually still printed out all the pages so that like when I go to shows, it looks like I have pages from a 70s comic, even though those are all
That's
just printed out on Bristol.
that, you know, you really do have something special here. I have to say, you know, because we've all seen a million, like, you know, people try to attempt something like this. And like I said, this just seems like one of the most authentic executions I've ever
Thank
seen.
you so
So
much.
I think people really will be excited about this book. I mean, you know, the fact that you're funded already is such a great sign. I
Mhm.
mean, your talent is kind of obvious. And like I said, like every page is just jam packed with like so much work and effort. Like, thank God you're being rewarded for your
Well,
effort.
thank you.
Um, now
Yeah, it's great.
I'm curious if this is this your regular style, or did you adapt it a lot to try to fit the aesthetic of what you were going for?
It's funny you mentioned that because I've seen a couple of people talk about me doing a retro style, and this isn't. This is just how I draw. Like, this is how I drew in like 1985, and in many ways, it's a testament to my lack of growth as an artist. But I mean, it's a more refined version of it. But no, this was I learned to draw on how to draw comics the Marvel way. And I actually, as I was drawing this book, I did have my copy of that the whole time. The whole time I was penciling, I could flip back and like, how does John Buscema, how did those artists solve that problem? But yeah, it was a deliberate attempt to do that, but that is my natural style. So this is, if I were to just sit down and draw right now, that's what comes out. As you know, as I've become an artist and went to art school and did all that stuff, I've learned how to draw in other ways. But this is the natural style. That's the style that I take the most pleasure in drawing because I mean honestly, that's how I drew when I was 10 years old. And that the drawing like that when I was 10 felt so good, it made me want to keep drawing for the rest of my life. So when I draw like that, that's when I feel the best about doing drawing. And when I do any kind of artwork professionally, and I'm doing something else, and I'm doing a style I don't like, and I'm doing it for a client, and I'm doing it for money, and there's the joy in that is there because doing any kind of creative thing is joy. But more of the joy is like, well, I'm getting paid for this. But like this book, the joy was, and it's funny, I realized that as I was sitting on my couch on the iPad drawing, that I was just completely immersed and I completely shut out the world. And even my wife was just like commenting, like I would just lose myself. And it made me kind of think, is is this what my mom saw back, in 1978 as I was sitting there on a pad drawing stuff. So like that has always been there. And that's the getting to do that on this book, um like that was really a thrill. Like that was one of the things is again, professionally doing stuff my whole life but never doing anything for yourself, and when you get to be the one calling the shots, it's just so weirdly satisfying. And I actually, it's funny, there's a lot of things in here that I did that are probably dumb, that are probably not a smart idea creatively or won't connect to the audience. But it's like, well, I don't care. I'm doing this for myself. I get to be the crazy client that does something that makes no sense to anybody but themselves. And it's like exhilarating. Like I totally understand why now people would, when you would explain to a client, like, well, no, this doesn't make sense. If you actually do it like this, it'll be more successful. And they go, I don't care. I like this color. And you're just like, why are they shooting themselves in the foot? But when you're the one who's calling the shots and you're just kind of like, well, I don't care. I'm paying for this and I like this color. I don't care if someone else likes that color. They can pay for their own color. And like that was in this, it made me kind of understand self-publishing completely. Because it's like, wow, this is all me. I get to call all the shots and make it exactly the way that I want. And then the weird thing, and I was not expecting, like, I mean, if I didn't think this would get funded, I never would have done it, right? I mean, I'm not dumb. I'm not here to piss away my time. So I figured I could get it funded. I figured I had enough friends and things like that. I figured I know a few people who have lots of money, and if worse comes to worse, they take pity on me and buy out my high end. Um, but then to be completely exhilarated by the fact that I'm going into my backer report and going, I don't know who that guy is. There are 100, complete strangers who just looked at this and went, wow, that's cool. Let me buy this. And, just buying the book. Like these are like I have friends who are supporting and they're buying higher tiers and they're buying stuff that they don't really want, but they just want to give me $100. But it's the people who come in and like, no, I just want your book. This book is a book that I want to put in my collection. And like that has become a very weird rush that I never anticipated. Like this is the first time I've actually sold something of my own that I've made. I always kind of have joked I've spent my life making art that sells thing that I'm making things or selling things that other people make because I've always been in marketing. So all of my art is to sell things that other people make. And now I finally get to sell something that I make. And even though, like I said, I hate the selling part, I like the making part so much that even 100 people going like, "Hey, nice job," like that's like it's an amazing feeling that I've never really had before because I've never put work out there with my name on it. And so even like when you responded, with this opportunity, I was just like, oh my God, especially because watching your channel and seeing you talk about John Byrne and Jim Starl and facsimile editions and all of these older books. And I'm like, okay, the things that you love are the things that I love. So hopefully you'll see that in this book. And I've been getting so much of that. I've been getting a lot of people who are kind of like, yeah, I get it. I get it. There is something, not to criticize modern comics. And some people have interpreted what I've done as me saying, modern comics suck. And I don't believe that in the least. I buy plenty of modern comics. I think objectively, in terms of the range of stuff available, we are living in a golden age of comic books. I don't think you can really deny just how much incredibly creative stuff is available. It's just for me, there's a very specific sliver of it, which is things that look like Bronze Age comics. I don't think there's enough of those. And I get why. I get that that's how comics were exclusively for so long. So, it makes sense to broaden beyond that. But I just think it's one of those instances where there are things that we've lost as we've grown and moved and evolved into a more mature art form, that we've lost some of the things that got us to that mature art form in the first place. And this book is that for me.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, because it's like I said, it's like so I grew up in the 80s reading comics from there. So the comics before that didn't really interest me that much. Like I hated Kirby. I thought he was ugly. I didn't get it. Like I thought it was gross. Of course, I've since been,
I
um
think a lot of us are like that.
and it was, but it kind of makes sense, you know what I mean? But now, like that, they've been reprinting these Fantastic Four facsimile editions, and it's so fun to like you said with the Elsewhere books, for the facsimiles, it's like some people are like, oh yeah, they're expensive. We hate the shiny paper, and it also ruins the value of the original book. Well, first of all, I don't think the value of Fantastic
Nonsense.
Four #1 is
Right.
going anywhere. And second of all, I think that comics should always remain in print. And it's making me realize how wrong I was, and actually like giving me this like real thrill of like what it must have been like to be like a kid in the 60s and pick this up for the first time to
Yeah.
be like, holy shit, this is like crazy. No wonder why they were so popular and people like really loved
Yeah.
it. It's like so different than from what I would have expected too, you know? And it's just
Yeah.
so fun.
I love the facsimile editions, and it's the ads that really did it. I think one of the things that we lose in trade paperbacks is the context. You get all these stories one in a very short period of time, but I never really realized until I started kind of looking at this how when you look at the ads, you understand what's going on in comics at that time. You understand what's going on in the world at that time. There's ads for movies and things like that. That gives you a better snapshot of what the people who were reading that book, what else they were seeing and what else was going on. And that really changes how you read a book. I think that's one of the things that's very interesting now when I look at people who are much younger looking at books that I grew up on and reading into them things that are not necessarily there because they don't really understand like, well, no, that the reason that creator did that is because this is what was going on television that time, or this was a reaction to that. And without those other larger pop culture associations, they read the book in a very different way. And once I started understanding that, I really did understand like, yeah, the ads that we get, those cue us into the culture that was going on at the time. And one of the things that's interesting that breaks my heart, it kills me today. I'm a big Star Trek fan, and I had all of the Next Generations, Deep Space Nines, Voyagers on tape that I taped off the air. Like every week, I'd set the VCR, and I had a whole collection of them. When DVD came out, I pitched all of those because I just bought them on DVD. And now it kills me because that VHS collection, I still have like a few tapes randomly, and I don't know why I kept them. They have, crappy old standard dev versions, but they also have the ads that were on when I was watching those. And it completely changes my viewing of the episode because now I'm watching an episode of Star Trek that I've seen 100 times, but I'm seeing the ads really for the second time because every other time I've watched them, I've fast forwarded through them. So now I'm actually watching old things and going, oh, wow, I remember that commercial. Oh, I remember that. And especially interesting with ads like that or with shows because then you get like national. So there's one tape I had that was crazy because I taped 3 different episodes in 3 different states because I was traveling. So you go back and you watch it, and I'm getting local television from 3 different places. So that kind of made me realize like we are so inundated with advertising. And again, I'm in marketing, so my job has been to make advertising my whole life that it can't help but weave its way into the pop culture as we're experiencing it. But then when we experience that pop culture later, it's kind of devoid of that context. So putting ads back in, putting ads back in, watching TV shows with their ads, you understand the mindset of the audience, I think, a little bit better, which changes your read on the book.
Which parlays right into the letters pages, which
Mhm.
is such another fun part of the facsimiles, because you see how incestuous and how like how fandom breeds professionals too. Like there's
Right.
letters from Dave Cockrum in early Fantastic Four letters columns, and I like when they like bitch about the story or the art or something like
Mhm.
that. It just goes to show that like fandoms were just as passionate and
Yeah.
toxic and ravenous as they are today. One thing that I found interesting was that, people say girls didn't read comics. There's so many letters from girls in the letters
Yeah.
pages of comic books. Maybe just because they like to write more than boys. I don't know. But uh, the one thing I'm going to call you out on is that
Okay.
in your letters page, you used your name here twice.
That's actually
Is that for authentication?
no, that's actually part of the Kickstarter is
Oh, to get
you
your name
can
in there. Okay,
so
duh.
there's several spaces, yeah, where and some people have bought have actually subscribed to that. One of them is actually a good friend of mine, and I have a suspicion he's going to be the one who makes me put like Seymour Butts or some sort of offensive place instead of his real name. But yeah, so like there, I have names of some of my friends in some spots in there in letters pages and ads. But yeah, then also part of the Kickstarter rewards are you can have your name printed in the book in one of the letters or one of the ads. And so I left a bunch of spots open. And otherwise, those will just wind up being friends or other things like that, some made up people. There's actually, there were two somewhat famous letter hacks from the 70s, one by the name of T.M. Maple and one by the name of Elvis Orton. And so I have my own versions of them in the book. So TM Maple becomes Tim Apple, and Elvis Orton becomes Elvis Horton. So, again, like in one of the conceits of the book is that it's, an alternate dimension where Marvel Comics never existed, and instead this other comics company existed in its place. So Stanley Lieber, instead of taking his first name and making it into Stan Lee, he takes his last name and makes it into Lieber. So in this universe, he signs everything Lee Burr. And Jacob Kurtzberg takes the name Jack Curtis, which was one of Jack Kirby's real names. So everything in here is a little bit different, but it's still recognizable as it's Marvel Comics, but far enough away to avoid any copyright infringement. I hope. This was not run by lawyers, but I just kind of figured if Marvel does kind of decide I'm getting too close, then that will just sell a whole lot more books for me.
Well, I think it's definitely parody. Like I feel
Right.
like it falls under the category of parody
I
100%.
think it's obviously parody, but in 2025, I don't know if something being logical and clear necessarily means legal anymore.
I don't know. I mean, it's comic books is so bizarre anyway. It's like what's truly original. It's like I'm shook
Sure.
every time I realize something was derivative. Even Superman was inspired by
Yeah.
something else. So, and he's the first superhero. So, it's like I feel like every company has sort of like their version of something. We
Right.
saw a huge explosion of that like in the 80s and 90s, and I'm sure I'm guilty of it myself at some point. But it's just kind of the way it is.
Yeah.
So, and it's kind of the fun of comics in a way, you know what I mean? So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, realistically, one, I doubt that anybody at Marvel who would think that I'm infringing, one would see it, two would do anything other than kind of smile and laugh and think it's kind of amusing because obviously I have no threat. That's just, the paranoia kicking in. Whenever you're doing something that you're like, this is obviously a Captain America riff. If I catch the wrong person on the wrong day, and again, this is just weird fantasizing. The reality is no one would care and come after me. And again, part of the fantasy is if they did, I'd probably sell a lot more comics. So maybe, Marvel.
Yeah, but I mean, I
I'm
don't
just kidding.
know. Like I've seen much more egregious, like takes, and
Oh,
I mean,
I
some
mean,
people just do their straight up version of other characters, and
right.
it's so ridiculous. But I don't know, comics is kind of loose that way.
Well, and we had both have work in the Batman year one.
I
Um,
know, right?
those
Like
are
if you're
far
worried
more
about
egregious.
copyright infringement, I think that ship has sailed, brother.
Right, right. I've infringed an awful lot already, so if they're coming after me, they're late to the party. But yeah, and again, I think anybody who sees it will recognize that this is a love letter. I mean, this is just me saying this is the stuff that I grew up with, um, and you know, again, I don't want it to come off as being critical of new comics. I love new comics. There's amazing work out there. This is also just kind of like not just I want to see more stuff like this, but like I said, this is the stuff that brings me joy to make. So that's why I made an old comic because I love old comics.
Sometimes I get annoyed by comic books like the one you're making though, because like I have a big association with Big Bang, and I don't think people realize how amazing Big Bang is. Like
Yeah,
they're kind of dismissed as like rip-offs of Marvel and DC, but I feel like it's more like tribute and homage. Like they put so much effort and detail into authentic, like give doing authentic comics that seem like they're from the 50s and
yeah,
60s, to the point where Gary Carlson and Chris Ecker were using like pseudonyms, like Chris Ecker's Tom King instead of, like Jack Kirby or whatever and stuff
right.
like that. And it's like, but it's like I feel like if you find those back issues, because it's like they have like a history of Big Bang comics, and Gary did all this crazy work where he was like, since I don't actually have time and I wasn't alive in the 30s and 40s, I'm just going to make reference to all these stories. There's like a bunch of fake covers
Yeah,
and stuff like that. and if somebody didn't know better, they would think it was real. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like, you know, especially yours is on newsprint and stuff. If you found it like in a, well, I mean, but it says 2025 on it and stuff, so
Yeah.
people would know
Very
what
small
year it
though.
was doing. But it's like it's kind of funny how it's like almost a dupe in a way.
Yeah, yeah, that was the idea. That and, like, and it's funny you mentioned because that was one of the things. There's a book that is coming out soon from a guy named Dakota Alexander called The Hunter. There's books called The Masters that are on Kickstarter. The Sentinels. There's a book you should look into. It's called, I think, Tarot Agents. The guy who does that does an amazing John Byrne imitation. Like it to the point when I
Chris Malagran, is that his name or
no, he does side rail or something like that.
uh,
This guy is even better, and he actually in his book, it's called Tarot Agents. I'll send you a link or something. He actually has someone with the last name Hain as well, so he even ripped off that idea. He did an amazing job. He didn't print on newsprint, so there's been so many of these um, over the years, and I realize I'm just a part of it. But what I wanted to do, so for my Kickstarter video, my gag was I wanted all of us to be on the same spinner rack together. So my Kickstarter video opens with a spinner rack spinning around that's got a combination of old comics from 1979 and all of the retro comics that I have as well, because like all of that stuff, and it's even got like um, Jim Ruggs Octobriana. And I mean, so anything that was a throwback, even if it was just like 80s or 60s, I put on there because there's so many of those. And for me, like I see all that and I recognize that it's a bunch of them and a lot of it might be the same audience. But I look at that and I just kind of think, I think there really is an audience for that type of throwback comic from Marvel and DC. And I really wish they would. And I think part of like actually the reason that I became familiar with you in the first place is through cartoonist kayfabe ringside seats, and all of that came about because of cartoonist kayfabe, and the grand design books all play into that kind of retro element in one way or another. I mean, Ed definitely was kind of like a pioneer in the make it look like an old comic, and then one of the reasons I started following Ed Piskor in the first place was to learn how he did Hip Hop Family Tree because I wanted to do that sort of art myself. So I see so many people doing this and so many people responding to it. And you look in Facebook groups left and right, and you see people who are saying, I want flat color, I want newsprint, I want it to look like old stuff. That like I would really like to see Marvel and DC do basically new facsimile editions. It's a facsimile edition, but the pages in between are new stuff done in an old style. Like that's really what I would like to see from them. And I think that maybe if they eventually take notice of the fact that there's a large audience for people who want stories that look like they were done the way they were in the past, that maybe they'll actually take a chance and start trying some. And maybe they'll even start giving some work to the many out of work guys who should be getting work, like Jerry Ordway and Ron Friends and all those guys from the Bronze Age that are still around, that are still doing great work, but they just can't seem to get stuff from the companies.
I know it's like I was very excited to see Jerry Ordway be part of the new history of
Yes.
the DC universe, and he's one of the artists who does still want work and can't get it. Um, yeah, I wonder how other people feel because obviously we love them, but do
Yeah.
because it's like I I feel like there was, it's like I try not to be too much of an old fart, and I do love a lot of new comics. There are a lot of great comics out there. Obviously, I do a mix of old and new, so it's always great to find new comics that are exciting. But it feels like a lot of them are coming from Kickstarter. A lot of them are from
Yeah.
the indies, and Image is continuing to kill it as they do all the time. Um, but I feel like Marvel and DC have ups and downs, and they just had like a really down period for a long time, especially
Yeah.
like on the X books. Like all the art just looked the same. It looked like it was all inked in Procreate, and not that there's anything wrong with that. I use Procreate myself, and that's why I hate you because it just doesn't look like you did it digitally at all. And I'm trying to get there, but but I feel like there's been more of a renaissance lately. Like the Absolute books from DC are like major, like the art is undeniably gorgeous. So there are definitely fresh, exciting things going on in comics. You know, they're
Yeah.
always predicting the death of comics, and we're
Yeah.
still here, damn it. You know, as long as there are people like us, there will always be comics. As long as there are little kids with a stapler and a pack of typing paper at their kitchen table, you know, folding the pages themselves, as I'm sure
Right.
so many people did. I don't even know where I'm going with this, but
Well, and but it's interesting you mentioned that because I was having an argument, I guess, with a friend of mine who's a movie geek, and I was insisting that what makes comics kind of, one of the things that makes comics for me in particular, uh, a I don't want to say superior. That's the wrong word. I don't think art form should just, but a more engaging art form for me is the fact that you can very easily have a completely singular vision. And even when you don't, that vision is very often just a couple of people. But like even and this friend was insisting, well, indie movies are like this. Like, but in indie movie, you might have a writer and a director, but it's not a single actor. It's very rarely is it going to be a single person. One person can control all these other people, but the minute you've got other people working on it, especially a large number of people that you will have in a big movie or television, it's even if the single creator's vision comes through, it's filtered. But with comics, it's one can be one person, and that was to me what I did with this. It was wrote, penciled, inked, lettered, designed, prepping the files for print, sending to print, running the Kickstarter, publishing is something that can be done completely alone in comics. And you can do that with books, you can do that with music, but like with film and television and theater, those are not one man shows, no matter what you do. Or if they are, they're something, and you could do an experimental movie that's one person, but you can't just tell like a regular story. But with a comic, you can do every piece of it. Some components may be better than others, but one person can actually do that entire thing competently and communicate what they want very fully. Like that's magic to me. That to me is magic. And again, I get it. Books are the same way, almost, inherently. Music can be that way too. Um, for me, I'm a visual person, so I think of things in terms of, art and pictures, and that's movies and television and comics. I love music and pick or books that don't have pictures too. But for me, everything gravitates towards stuff that I look at with my eyes in that manner.
Yeah, for sure. Now, here's a question I should have asked in the beginning because, you telling me a little bit about your resume and your history or whatever. I was thinking you were about 94 years old because it's fully loaded, and you started working in a comic book store in the 80s and blah blah
Yeah,
blah. So, tell us about your comic journey and some of the things you've done and some of the work you've done. There's some Dawn of the Dead tidbit or
sure,
something.
sure. So I start reading comics in the mid 70s or so. So I think right around 75, 76, with Origins of Marvel Comics. Like I got that as a Christmas present. And I had dabbled in comics before, but that really kind of locked it in. Then Star Wars in 1977. Like this is a very typical nerd of my age resume. You read comics when you're a kid. Every boy my age read comics. Half the girls read comics, and then you just grew out of it. That was the old line: is you read comics, and then you discovered girls, and then you abandoned them. And then the small number of us who discovered girls and went, okay, I like girls and comics. We were the weirdos. Um, but like Star Wars comes in and like changes the landscape for everything and really just makes it possible to be the kind of geek that we are today. There's just so much of it that didn't exist prior to Star Wars, and that was to me. I was born in 1968, so I'm 9 years old. That's perfect. Like that's right at the time when I am ready to start spending every penny that I get on, sci-fi, fantasy, and comics. All of a sudden, there's more sci-fi, fantasy, and comics than there have ever been before. And so that was just a great time. And so I grow up uh, with comics of the late 70s and the 80s. That's Frank Miller on Daredevil, buying off the stands, buying the X-Men, the Byrne Claremont X-Men off the stands. And it was just such an amazing time to be a comic book fan. And I still look back on it and look at that growth um, over the early 80s. Then in 1986, I graduate high school, and a comic book shop opens up in my tiny little rural California town. And I always like to joke that I grew up and comic books grew up at the same time because both me and The Dark Knight Returns, I turn 18, The Dark Knight Returns comes out. The reality is neither one of us became adults. We just became more fascinated with boobs and blood and swearing. Like, none of us were actually mature. Uh, but yeah, I start working in a comic book store in 1986, which is kind of amazing.
Like the best year to work in a comic book, aside from
Oh,
85.
Oh, I mean, yeah, I mean, but like I'm without realizing at the time, I'm unpacking issues of Watchmen. The first Watchmen that I put on the stands is Watchmen 4, which is my favorite issue still to this day, the Dr. Manhattan issue. I'm putting Man of Steel on the shelf. I'm putting Dark Knight Returns on the shelf. I'm getting to read all of this stuff as it's coming out without having to buy it. Like that's the amazing thing. Like that's the weird thing though is you work at a comic book store, and I've worked at comic book stores 3 times in my life. And I have the CLZ app. I don't know if you're familiar with that to track your comics. So
Mm-mm.
it's an app that you can use to track your comics, and you can enter it every month, and you can organize your books by year and it'll show like in 1986 I have this many books that are from 1986. Whenever I organize by year, I can tell the years that I worked at a comic book store because all of a sudden the numbers spike because you have access to everything. You read everything. And when a comic book fan reads a comic book he loves, he doesn't put it back on the shelf. He buys it with his employee discount. So I was just buying comics left and right because I was getting them at basically a little above cost, and I was reading constantly. So that was just a great time to be a comic book fan. And but that was also during the boom, the 80s black and white explosion. So when that tanks in 1988 or so, comic book store goes under in 1988 as well. Um, at that point, I was drawing. I was trying to break into comics, showing my portfolio at conventions and stuff like that, getting some decent feedback. And then, just sort of life changes and gets in the way. And I move and across the country and then have some life changes, and basically just give up the thought of doing comics professionally and just go into art school. And but then while I'm in art school, I get a job at another comic book store because I'm buying comics like crazy. And I'm working in a movie theater, I think, at that time. Most of my jobs have been involved in entertainment in some way.
I'm like, this is like a nerd's dream, right?
Yeah. I worked in movie theaters, comic book shops. Um, and actually I was working at a movie theater when the owner of a comic book shop by the name of Todd Johnson came in. Now, Todd Johnson is the co-creator of Tribe, along with Larry Stroman from Image Comics. And he owned a comic book store called the Comics Cafe in Ferndale, Michigan. And that's how he met Larry. He would bring artists in to do signings and he'd become friends with them. And when Larry got the opportunity to write a comic for Image, he reached out to Todd and said, what do you want to do? Let's make a comic. So the money that Todd got from Tribe funded his expanding his one comic book store into three. And so he opened up a second comic book store that was right down the street from the movie theater that I was working at. Todd came in. He recognized me as a comic book fan because I had been to his shop many times and things like that. And of course, he's entirely self-promotion. He's like, "Hey, I'm opening up a comic book store down the street. You should check it out." So I just go check it out because it's down the street, and I would go there on my lunch break. And after a couple of weeks of going there, his manager quit. So then he needed to sort of rework his staff. The one person now became the new manager. He needed a new staff member, and so he just offered me a job. And so I started working at a comic book store again, and that was 1993. That was right around the time the Return of Superman stuff was coming out, and Tribe had just come out. Um, and that becomes kind of interesting because I'm working at a comic book store again during a very interesting and exciting time. I mean, it's a boom. This is image, all the new Image comics, Vertigo Comics, Malibu, all this stuff. So again, it's this amazing period of growth and change in comics, and I'm there being able to unload comics onto the shelf and see it from behind the scenes again. And then beyond that, Todd winds up leaving Image and creating Axis Comics and eventually Good Comics, and I wind up being part of that. So when he started Axis Comics, if you look at the address for that, or if you look at even in issue one of Tribe, he has an address for his hats and shirts and stuff like that. That's all his comic book store. So when people would call in and buy Tribe merchandise, the people who worked at his comic book store like me would take the orders and stuff like that. So I got this glimpse into even publishing back then on a small level. Todd bought a Macintosh and was coloring. I actually learned how to color comics back then, and this is Photoshop 2.5, Photoshop 3. So there's not even layers at that point. Um, so really, I got to have a very interesting look at comics, one from a retailer perspective, but then as a small press publisher perspective, and seeing all of that, and especially seeing what happened with Good Comics and Axis Comics, and then how everybody reported it. Like that's the first time when you start to realize, oh yeah, people outside of this are telling a very different story that I'm seeing on the inside, just because they don't have access to the information. And even I don't have access to much. I'm a small time employee. So I don't even know what Todd knows and the other behind the scenes stuff. So that also was the first time I got this glimpse of how comic book fans perceive what's going on is not necessarily accurate to what's going on.
Ain't that the truth?
Yeah. And so that, the the industry goes bust again, and this comic store goes under. Um, and I wind up getting a job. Have a couple other jobs. And I wind up getting a job at a company called Anchor Bay Entertainment, which at the time I knew nothing about, and I, until recently, didn't realize was is quite famous among, uh,
I've heard of
hor-
it.
yeah, horror fans, cult movie fans. They're a home video company from Michigan that really was there at the beginning of the DVD explosion, and I started there shortly after that. And yeah, they put out on home video things like The Evil Dead, Halloween, Dawn of the Dead, The Hills Have Eyes, also The Walking Dead. So if you purchased The Walking Dead on home video, you bought an Anchor Bay DVD, and I worked on all of that stuff because I was the comic book guy, and I was started off as a designer, eventually became the creative director. So I worked on a lot of the major projects. So if you have The Walking Dead on DVD, or if you have The Evil Dead on DVD, odds are it's one of the projects that I worked on as the graphic designer. So I got to work on a lot of really interesting, cool stuff. Hellboy animated, which was a huge, huge deal for me because I was always such a huge Hellboy fan. And when we got the rights to do Hellboy, it was just, I fortunately I was one of the people who was signed who got to work on what. So pretty much I got to work on everything I wanted to work on, which was Hellboy, Walking Dead, we put out Sin City: A Dame to Kill For, the sequel, which was great. I love Frank Miller, and it may not have been as popular as the first one, but for me, just being able to work on something that had Frank Miller's name on it is just a joy. So yeah, I've been very, very lucky in that I've worked at comic book stores, I've worked in geeky home video, working on really cool projects my whole life. So I have been blessed as far as a geek goes, and I realize it, and I hope that I can continue to be blessed, and having people check out this comic, because like that's where all of this has led to. Is I love movies. I'm a big movie geek, and working at Anchor Bay was pretty amazing. But at its heart, I'm a comic book fan more than anything else. And the work that I've done on this book, even though it's going to be seen by a couple hundred people, means more than the work on The Walking Dead, which was seen by hundreds of thousands of people. Because Walking Dead belongs to Robert Kirkman, it belongs to Greg Nicotero, it belongs to, I can't remember who the original showrunner was. Um, but it belongs to those people. All I did was just slap a cover on a DVD, largely that a dozen other people approved and tweaked. But like, and that's awesome. I'm glad that I got to do all the stuff. It was a blast to work on it. But like, the real joy is working on a comic book that I did myself.
Yes, and it's amazing. It is such a great comic book. It is like beautiful. It's authentic. Like I said, it shows how much work you went put into it, and obviously people are responding. You have successfully funded your Kickstarter, um, and there good news is I'll be posting this ASAP, and there
Thank you.
should be plenty of time left for people
Yes.
to jump on the bandwagon and get this book because if you do watch my channel, this is definitely one you're not going to want to miss out on. It is so cool. It is so good. It feels definitely like getting into a time machine and going back to Marvel and reading it. So if you're a fan
This
of
is,
like Jim
this is what the book
Starlin,
looks like.
I mean, it looks great. Oh, so is it traditional standard comic size or
Oh yeah, this is a regular comic. The purpose, and you can see that's all old school style artwork, letters, pages, all of that. There's your Sea Monkey ads.
Aqua
And
Monkey?
this is my high school photo.
That is hysterical because anyone who read comics from that era knows exactly the ad that you're lampooning
Yeah,
that, and I love that you did that. That and like I said, it's so crazy. Like your pedigree and graphic design shows because like it's so on point. All the references and things you're doing here. So before we wrap up, is there anything you want to talk about or tell us about before that we should know for your amazing comic book campaign?
no, I think we've covered everything really well. Thank you so much. I just, one, I want to thank you again for this attention. This was a labor of love, and like I had mentioned when I'd been following your channel for a while, and seeing what you talked about on there made me realize, like, oh yeah, this is someone who's going to dig what I'm doing, and that's really what I want more than anything else. Like I'm glad at this point that it has been funded. It's actually surpassed the funding goal. So I will have to at this point come out of less money myself and possibly even break even, which like like that's happy to me. Like I don't need this to make money. This was never intended to be a money making thing. This was intended to be a bucket list thing and also to just put something out there that I think a lot of people have wanted, even if they don't know they've wanted it. Like there's been a lot of things that are like this, like the facsimile issues. You mentioned that Robert Kirkman issue. I think that was fantastic. There have been so many of these things that do parts of what I thought was authentic, but always kind of missed by one thing. They weren't on the right paper, or they even something simple like they used gradients. And it's like, well, technically they didn't use gradients back then. There was always something a little off. And I wanted to try and nail as close as I could with the modern technology that we have. And then, you get there and then you start going, yeah, but we'll be off a little bit here or there. And the fact that so many people have responded to that so favorably. Like I was expecting, like I expected to sell. I was not expecting people to reach out and go, "Wow, thank you. This I've been looking for something like this. This is what we've been missing." Because that means that not only were they just responding to the work, that they were kind of feeling that same thing missing that I was feeling. And like that's why to me it's like I hope that you know somebody is paying attention to the fact that and like the previous person who did this, a guy named Dakota Alexander, he did a Kickstarter with a very similar book. And he did like $15,000. Like his was actually very successful. And he's going to do it regularly. If more and more of these things become successful and get attention, I do think, how many people had to post their bootleg copies of X-Men Elsewhere before Marvel went, there's money on the table. So yeah, how many people have to do their knockoff Bronze Age Marvel comics before Marvel goes, let's make a Bronze Age Marvel comic, which is really what I want to do. And honestly, part of the reason why I'm happy to print up a bunch of these is because sooner or later, every editor at Marvel is going to get a free copy of The Last of Brax and handed to them at a convention, just in case they want to do an old school Marvel comic. I know how to do it.
Yeah, I think you definitely have a great e-ticket there to pass around and get some interest and notice for sure. Okay, so hang out after I sign off because I have a couple of questions for you, but and want to say a proper goodbye. But the link will be in the description of the video to you guys jump on this campaign and make sure you pledge to the last Abraxan. Mike Ortiz's amazing homage, love letter, throwback, time machine facsimile edition of a 70s sort of sci-fi amazing epic Marvel comic in a way.
Thank you.
So
Thank you so much.
you're welcome. Thanks for
Um,
being here, Mike. And
One thing that I can say is if you do want a little bit more information, which includes a lot of preview art and all the behind the scenes information, I do have a website, lastabraxan.com, and that also has links to the Kickstarter, links to a bunch of artwork, and eventually, hopefully, I'll be selling the book there as well.
perfect. Okay, so I will link that in the description of the video as well. Make
Awesome.
sure you
Thank you.
check out the campaign, check out the website for The Last Abraxan. There's a lot of good stuff on there to eat up for you Ravenous fans. Jump on this campaign. There's only about a week left, and there's still time to get in on it, but don't want to miss it. Thanks so much for talking to me, Mike. It was super interesting to hear everything you had to say. I could definitely talk to you for hours about some of this stuff. Um,
Thanks for having me. It was my
you're
pleasure.
welcome. All right. Thanks for watching, everybody. Check out the
Bye, everybody.
campaign. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Hit that like button, and I will bring you more soon.